She made 13 to 25 an hour. She had made that same 13 to 25 an hour for 6 years, arriving at the Iron Gate on Tuxedo Road before the rest of Atlanta had finished its first cup of coffee. She folded her apron the same way each morning, tucked it into her canvas bag, and walked the same path from the bus stop on Peachtree Battle Avenue to the side entrance of Brannigan's estate, since the family never used. He made $3.4 billion. His name was on the building. Her name was on a timesheet no one ever read. On a Thursday afternoon in October, Yvette Caldwell stood in a second-floor hallway with a tray of tea in her hands and a closed door in front of her. She had heard what was happening inside that room. She had stood there for 11 seconds. She made a choice. It cost her everything. What she did not know was that the man who owned that estate had already written her name on a small piece of paper. 14 months before that Thursday, not because of what she was, because of who she already was. This is her story. Stay with further if you believe that one quiet act of courage can change the course of a life, yours or someone else's. Please subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what time it is in your city. We have people joining us from all across this country, and every single comment reminds us why these stories matter. And if you have ever stood at a door, any kind of door, and had to decide whether to open it or walk away, we want to hear about that too. Like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded today that doing the right thing still means something. Now let us begin. Yvette Caldwell arrived at the side entrance of Brannigan Estate at 6:51 in the morning, the same time she had arrived for 6 years and 4 months. The Iron Gate on Tuxedo Road was already unlocked. The overnight security guard left it that way for her. A small courtesy that had never been formally arranged, but had held without interruption since her 3rd week on the job. She walked the stone path around the east wing, past the Japanese maple that had dropped its leaves early this year, past the motion sensor light that flickered on and then off as she moved beneath it. The house was quiet. It was always quiet at this hour, and the quiet was the part of the day she liked best. She let herself in through the kitchen entrance. The alarm panel blinked green. She set her canvas bag on the 3rd hook beside the door, the one that had been informally hers since the 1st month, and tied her apron with the double knot her mother had taught her. The kitchen smelled of the previous evening's dinner, something with garlic and rosemary, and beneath that the particular stillness that large houses carry when everyone in them is still asleep. She filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and began. Her hourly wage was $13.20. She worked 5 days a week, 7 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. After taxes, her monthly take-home was $1,891. Her rent in Vine City was $1,047 a month, a number that had not changed in 3 years because her landlord, Mr. Pettigrew, was 71 years old and believed that raising rent on a working woman was a sin he did not want to account for. Her mother's quarterly diabetes management visits at the clinic on Joseph E. Lowry Boulevard cost $340 out of pocket. That left a remainder Yvette managed with the precision of someone who had been doing this arithmetic her entire adult life, keeping the account above zero, never touching the $600 she kept in savings for the kind of emergency that had not yet arrived, but that she knew, with the certainty of experience, eventually would. Most months she arrived at the day before payday with less than $200 in her checking account. She did not find this frightening anymore. She found it familiar. What most people do not know is that domestic workers like Yvette occupy one of the least protected categories of labor in the United States. The National Labor Relations Act, which guarantees most workers the right to organize and bargain collectively, explicitly excluded domestic workers when it was written in 1935, a deliberate decision that has never been fully corrected. In Georgia specifically, there is no state law requiring advance notice before terminating a domestic worker, no minimum severance requirement, no mandatory documentation of cause. A family can end the employment of a housekeeper or caretaker at any moment for any reason without explanation. The people who raise other people's children, who hold the daily life of a household, together with their labor and their discretion, these are among the least protected workers in the country. Yvette knew this. She had chosen to stay anyway because Brannigan Estate was steady and the work was honest, and the children, when they were here, needed her in a way she understood without needing it explained. The children were the reason she had not left in year 3, when a family in Buckhead had offered her $15 an hour. They were Otis Brannigan's grandchildren, a boy and a girl, left in the care of the estate for weeks at a time while their parents traveled for work. Her job description covered household management, meal preparation, and light child care during their visits. But children do not observe job descriptions. They observe that Miss Yvette knew where the good flashlights were kept, that she could braid hair and fix a broken zipper, and explain why thunder came after lightning, that her voice did not change when they were scared. They had been calling her Miss Yvette since the older one was 4. She had been answering to it ever since. On a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of September, Yvette was cleaning Otis Brannigan's study on the 1st floor. She did this room last, always, because the papers on his desk were arranged in a specific order she had learned in her first month never to disturb. She dusted the shelves. She emptied the small waste bin beside the credenza. She moved to the desk, lifting the brass paperweight to wipe the surface beneath it, setting it back with care. As she lifted it, the corner of a notepad shifted and she saw the top page. A short list, handwritten, 8 or 9 names in a column. She did not read the names. She was not in the habit of reading things that were not hers. But her own name caught her eye the way your own name always does, even in a room full of other words. Yvette Caldwell. First on the list. She set the paperweight back down and finished wiping the desk and moved on. She did not think about it for the rest of the morning. She was refilling the paper towels in the powder room off the main hall when she heard Otis Brannigan's voice behind the closed study door. Low and precise, the voice of a man who had spent 40 years saying exactly what he meant and not a word more. Then the voice stopped, the door opened, and Otis stepped out, still holding his phone, and saw her in the hallway. He looked at her for one full second, not the way employers usually looked at her, which was mostly not looking at all, but directly, with the focused attention of someone making a note of something. He gave a short nod. He went back inside and closed the door. She thought nothing of it. She collected her supplies and moved to the next room. That same afternoon at 3:47, Conrad Hale's assistant called the estate landline. Yvette answered it, as she always did when the house manager was unavailable. The assistant said Mr. Hale would be coming to the estate the following Thursday for a working session, arriving at 2 in the afternoon, 2nd floor library, meeting for 2. Light refreshments, privacy. Yvette wrote it in the household log the way she wrote everything: date, time, nature of request, name of the caller. She noted the room. She noted the time. She did not note anything else because there was nothing else to note. Not yet. Otis Brannigan had started with a single service station on Eisenhower Parkway in Macon, Georgia, in the spring of 1987. He was 23 years old, had $4,400 in savings, and had borrowed an additional $11,000 from his uncle Chester, who had made him sign a handwritten agreement at the kitchen table and told him that if he defaulted, Chester would take the station and the shirt off his back. Otis had paid Chester back in full by the end of the 2nd year. He had sent a handwritten note along with the final check. 2 sentences. Thank you for believing I would not fail. I did not intend to prove you wrong. Chester had framed the note. Otis had learned everything he needed to know about leverage and trust from a man who wore overalls and kept his word. By 1994, he had 4 stations. By 2001, he had moved into natural gas distribution, a decision that cost him 2 years of difficult negotiations with suppliers who did not take a 37-year-old black man from Macon seriously until they saw his balance sheet. By 2009, he had expanded into renewable energy infrastructure, positioning Brannigan Meridian Energy at the edge of a market that most of his competitors were still calling a trend rather than a transformation. He was right. They were wrong. The company now operated 14 logistics and distribution facilities across 6 states, held contracts with municipal utility providers from Charlotte to Phoenix, and carried a net asset valuation of $3.4 billion. The headquarters occupied the top 4 floors of Brannigan Tower on Peachtree Center Avenue, and the corner office on floor-to-ceiling windows that faced north over the Atlanta skyline. Otis rarely looked out those windows. He was usually looking at the numbers. His wife, Gloria, had died 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in October, gone by the following April. They had been married for 29 years. She had been the one person in his life tell him he was wrong, without him needing a moment to decide whether to be angry about it first. He had not found another person like that since. He had not looked. The grief had settled into something quieter over time, not healed, not gone, but compressed, the way pressure compresses things until it occupied less space without weighing less. He kept her photograph on his desk at Brannigan Tower. He kept a smaller one at the estate. He did not talk about her at work. He carried it the way he carried most things, alone and without complaint. The office knew him as precise, demanding, and fair, not warm. Precision and warmth were not the same thing, and Otis had never pretended otherwise. He paid competitive wages and kept his word on contracts and did not tolerate dishonesty in any direction, upward, downward, or lateral. 3 people had been dismissed from Brannigan Meridian in the past decade for misrepresenting figures to his office, and in each case, the dismissal had come within 48 hours of the discovery. His staff respected him the way people respect something reliable. They knew what he was and what he was not. That clarity was its own kind of comfort. Conrad Hale had joined the company in March of 2019, 4 months after marrying Diane. His title was Executive Vice President of Internal Operations, a role that had been created specifically for him, with a salary of $340,000 a year and a scope of authority that Otis had drawn carefully, wide enough to give Conrad room to prove himself, narrow enough that the critical decisions still required Otis's signature. Conrad was intelligent. He understood systems and could read a room and present well to the board. He was also the kind of man who mistook access for accomplishment, who had spent enough time in rooms with powerful people that he had begun to confuse proximity with equivalence. Otis had recognized this within the first 6 months. He had said nothing because Diane loved Conrad, and because recognizing a flaw in someone is not the same as having the evidence to act on it. The first woman requested a transfer in March of last year. She had been Conrad's executive assistant for 7 months. She submitted the transfer request through HR without a stated reason, which HR noted as unusual, and which was approved without follow-up, because that was how these things were handled. The second was in September, a junior analyst from the operations team. Again, no stated reason, again approved. The third was in November, a project coordinator who had worked directly under Conrad on a 2-state infrastructure rollout. 3 transfers in 8 months, 3 women, no documentation, no complaints filed, no explanations offered. Otis knew what the absence of a complaint could mean. He had been in business long enough to understand that the absence of a complaint was not evidence of the absence of a problem. It was often evidence of the opposite. He had retained an internal investigator in February, a woman named Priscilla Oakes, former HR compliance director, methodical and discreet. She had spent 6 weeks reviewing Conrad's personnel interactions, meeting logs, and communications. She had found nothing. Conrad was careful. He conducted his worst behavior in spaces with no record, no emails, no texts, no witnesses. Or rather, no witnesses who had yet decided that the cost of speaking was worth paying. What Otis needed was someone who had seen something directly. Someone with nothing to gain from silence and the kind of character that made telling the truth feel less like a choice and more like a reflex. He did not know where to find that person. He did not know that she was already inside his house, arriving every morning at 6:51, folding her apron the same way, beginning her day the way she had begun it for 6 years and 4 months. He found out on a Thursday morning, standing at his kitchen counter at 5:58 with a cup of coffee and a message on his phone from his operations director in Houston. A regulatory filing issue needed him in person. The earliest flight was at 6:20. He set down the coffee. He told his driver to bring the car around. He was in the back seat of his Maybach and moving down Tuxedo Road by 6:11, his phone already open to the Houston briefing documents. He passed Conrad's Bentley coming the other way at 6:14, 200 yards from the estate entrance. Neither man noticed the other. At 2:53 in the afternoon, Yvette carried the tea tray up the main staircase of Brannigan Estate. She had prepared it the way she prepared everything in that house, with attention and without hurry. 2 white porcelain cups, the kind with the thin gold rim that she hand-washed separately and never put in the machine. The Earl Grey was steeped to 3 minutes as exact, the way the household manual specified, and the way she would have done it regardless, because 3 minutes was correct, and there was no reason to do it incorrectly when correct was available. A small plate of shortbread on the side, a folded linen napkin beneath each cup. The tray was level in her hands as she reached the second-floor landing. The hallway stretched ahead of her, 12 feet of hardwood floor, a Persian runner down the center, the library at the far end. The door was closed. A thin bar of amber light showed beneath it. She had cleaned this hallway 431 times, by her own rough count, and she knew the way the afternoon light came through the window at the hall's end and settled on the floor in a particular rectangle that shifted by season. She moved toward the door. She was 7 feet away when she heard the voices. Conrad's first, low, deliberate, the voice of a man who had decided the room already belonged to him. She could not make out the words at that distance, only the register, the particular cadence of someone not asking. Then a woman's voice, younger, quieter, a voice doing the careful work of finding language that would allow her to say no without using the word. Yvette stopped walking. She stood there. The tray was level in her hands. The cups did not move. She counted afterward, though she had not meant to count at the time. 11 seconds. In 11 seconds, she thought about her mother's next appointment at the clinic on Joseph E. Lowry Boulevard, which was in 19 days, and the $340 it would cost, and the $194.17 currently sitting in her checking account. She thought about 6 years and 4 months of arriving at 6:51 and leaving at 4 and never once giving this house or the people in it a reason to question her. She thought about her canvas bag on the third hook by the kitchen door and what it would mean to carry it out of this house for the last time. She thought about all of it in the particular compressed way that people think when the mind is moving faster than the seconds allow. She was still holding the tray. Her left hand was steadier than her right. She noticed that. Then she stopped thinking and put her right hand on the door handle and opened the door. The library was lit by the two lamps on either side of the reading table, warm light, the kind that made the room feel sealed from the rest of the afternoon. Conrad stood near the window with his back partially to the door. The young woman, Yvette, did not know her name, had seen her once or twice in the hallways of Brannigan Tower when she had gone to drop off documents for the house manager, was standing on the far side of the table, her hand flat on its surface, a folder of papers between them. She looked up when the door opened. The expression on her face changed the way an expression changes when an exit appears in a room that had seemed to have none. Yvette set the tray on the sideboard beside the door without looking at Conrad. She straightened the cups. She said without raising her voice and without looking away from the tray, "Sir, the children are asking for you downstairs." There were no children in the house that day. She knew it too, a half-second later, but that half-second was the one that mattered. Conrad looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Calculation. Not anger, not yet. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He said nothing. He walked past her and out the door. Yvette did not watch him go. She turned toward the young woman, who was still standing on the far side of the table, with her hand on its surface. They looked at each other for 3 seconds. There was nothing to say. There was also nothing that needed to be said. Yvette gave the smallest nod she had. The young woman gave it back. Yvette picked up the tray and left. What Yvette did not fully know, though she had kept a Georgia legal aid information sheet folded in her canvas bag for 2 years, was the specific legal protection available to her. Under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, any individual who witnesses workplace sexual harassment and reports it in good faith is protected from retaliation, and that protection extends to witnesses, not only direct victims. Georgia follows federal EEOC guidelines allowing a complaint within 180 days of the Retaliatory Act. In practice, employers find other reasons to terminate. They always do. But the paper trail, dates, times, verbatim accounts, is the difference between a claim that can be pursued and one that disappears. Yvette did not know all of this precisely. She knew enough. That night, she sat at her kitchen table at 11:23 with a yellow legal pad and a pen and wrote down everything she had heard and seen. She wrote the date. She wrote the time. She wrote the rooms and the names of the people present and the words she had heard through the door and the expression on the young woman's face when the door opened. She wrote it in the flat, factual language of someone making a record, not a story, because records hold in ways that stories do not. When she was done, she read it back once. Then she folded the pages, put them in an envelope, sealed it, and wrote the address of the Georgia Legal Aid Society's office on Edgewood Avenue on the front. She set the envelope on the table. Then she turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. She lay in the dark for a long time. She did not sleep for most of it. At 5:47 in the morning, she was awake before her alarm, sitting on the edge of the bed in the gray pre-dawn light that came through the gap in the curtains. She could see the kitchen table from where she sat. The envelope was still there, white rectangle on dark wood. She looked at it for a moment. Then she got up, put on her shoes and her coat, picked up the envelope, and walked 4 blocks to the post office on Westlake Avenue. The door opened at 6. She was the first person through it. She sent it certified mail. Return receipt requested. She walked back home, changed her clothes, and caught the 6:22 bus to Tuxedo Road. 11 days after Yvette sent the envelope, Conrad Hale called her into the estate's ground floor office at 9:17 in the morning. She had known this call was coming. She had known it since the morning after she mailed the letter, when she arrived at 6:51 and Conrad's car was already in the drive, and he did not look at her when she passed him in the kitchen hallway. He had not looked at her once in 11 days. That was its own kind of answer. He sat behind the desk with a single sheet of paper in front of him and told her, without prelude, that her employment was being terminated effective immediately. The stated reason was conduct unbecoming of household staff. He used the phrase like language prepared in advance, cleanly, without inflection, the words of a decision already made and only now being delivered. He did not ask her to respond. She did not. She went to the utility room off the kitchen where she kept the small personal items she had brought into the house over 6 years. A brushed nickel coat hook she had installed herself in her second month, because the existing hooks were full. A photograph of her mother, wallet-sized, tucked into the frame of the small mirror above the shelf. She removed the hook with the flathead she kept in her bag. She slid the photograph free. She put both in her canvas bag. Then she picked up her apron from the third hook by the kitchen door, folded it the way she always folded it, and set it back. It was not hers to take. She walked down the stone path, through the iron gate on Tuxedo Road. The gate closed behind her with a sound she had heard 432 times. This was the last. Conrad did not stop there. Within the week, Yvette began to understand the shape of what he had done. Her name had been flagged with families she had listed as references. The word used was unreliable. No specifics, no documentation. Just the word, offered in the tone of a confidence, from a man whose title and address carried enough weight that most people would not think to question it. She found out from the third family's house manager, a woman she had known for years, who called her out of a decency Conrad had not counted on. Over the following three weeks, she applied to 7 positions, 3 families in Buckhead, 2 in Sandy Springs, 1 in Druid Hills, 1 domestic staffing agency, Piedmont Road. She heard back from 2 with brief, polite rejections. From the other 5, nothing. She had never had a gap in employment in 18 years of household work. She understood what the silence meant. Her checking account held $347.22. Her rent was due in 9 days. Her mother's quarterly appointment was in 11. She sat at the kitchen table in Vine City on a Tuesday afternoon and looked at these numbers the way she had looked at numbers her entire life. Steadily, without flinching, trying to find the arrangement that worked. There was no arrangement. Not this month. The knock came at 4:38 that same afternoon. Diane Brannigan Hale stood on the porch with her hands clasped and her eyes doing the work of staying composed. Yvette had seen her only in photographs at the estate, and photographs do not carry the quality of a person standing in front of you with something they have been rehearsing. Diane said she was not there to threaten her. She said she understood what Yvette had seen. She said her marriage was something she was still trying to understand, that there were things she had not known and things she had perhaps chosen not to look at too closely. She was not asking Yvette to forgive any of that. She was asking, and here her voice dropped, if Yvette would consider withdrawing her statement. Not for Conrad, she said with emphasis, as though she had promised herself she would say it clearly. Not for him, for her family, for the version of things she was still trying to hold together. Yvette listened without interrupting. When Diane finished, there was a silence of several seconds in which the two of them stood on either side of the doorway, and the afternoon light sat flat and even on the porch between them. Yvette said, I understand what you're asking. I can't do it. She said it without anger and without apology. Not because she did not feel the weight of what Diane was carrying. She could see it plainly. But there are things a person cannot undo once they have been done correctly, and the envelope had been correct. Diane nodded once. She said thank you, which surprised Yvette slightly. Then she walked back to the car at the curb. Yvette closed the door. She stood with her back against it, eyes closed, in the stillness that comes after a hard thing has been done, and the doing of it has not made it easier. 2 minutes. Then she went to the kitchen and put the kettle on for her mother's evening tea. Otis Brannigan's car pulled into the estate at 7:51 that evening. His flight from Houston had been delayed 47 minutes, and he had spent the time on the tarmac reviewing regulatory filings rather than resting. He was tired in the specific way of a man who had been managing a crisis for 11 days while managing not to show it. His house manager, Leonard, met him at the side entrance. Leonard was 61 years old and had worked for the Brannigan household for 14 years and was one of 7 people whose name appeared on the notepad in Otis's study. He told Otis about Yvette's termination in the measured tone of a man delivering information he knew to be significant. He told him the stated reason. He told him about the calls to her references. Otis stood in the hallway and said nothing for 47 seconds. Leonard counted because he knew Otis well enough to know that the length of a silence was its own kind of communication. Then Otis set down his travel bag, walked to the ground floor office, and opened the door. Conrad was inside, on his phone. Otis waited for him to lower it. Then he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. No one who worked at Brannigan Estate that day was told what was said in the ground floor office between Otis Brannigan and his son-in-law. Leonard, who had stood in the hallway outside for the first 11 minutes before moving to the kitchen, said afterward only that he had heard Otis's voice once, briefly, and that it had not been raised. He said it the way people describe thunder that arrives without much sound. The absence of volume was not the absence of force. At 1:43 in the afternoon, Conrad Hale walked out of the estate's side entrance with 2 bags and a garment carrier. His driver was waiting. He did not look back at the house. He did not say goodbye to anyone. He was gone. Diane called at 2:11. Otis was still in the ground floor office, standing at the window that looked out over the east garden when his phone rang. She was angry in the way that people are angry when the thing they most feared has arrived and they are not yet ready to know what to do with it. She asked him how he could do this. She told him she had tried to handle it herself, that she had gone to see Yvette and it had not worked, and that he had not given her enough time. She spoke for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Otis listened to all of it. When she stopped, he said, "I chose to protect him for 18 months because I loved you. Today I choose to protect you instead from the man you married." Diane said nothing for a long moment. Then she ended the call. Otis did not call her back. He had said what was true, and truth did not become more true by being repeated. What Yvette did not yet know, but what the Georgia legal aid attorney who received her certified envelope had already confirmed in a letter she would find in her mailbox 2 days later, was that her wrongful termination claim had standing. Under the Georgia Whistleblower Protection Act and Title VII retaliation provisions, an employee terminated for documenting workplace harassment as a witness has a viable legal claim. The paper trail she had built, the certified letter, the return receipt, the dated legal pad pages, the testimony of the house manager who had called about the reference flagging, was the kind of record that employment attorneys describe as a strong foundation. She had not known she was building a foundation. She had only known she was telling the truth. It turned out those were the same thing. At Brannigan Tower, the company's internal review of Conrad's conduct, initiated by Otis the morning after his return from Houston, moved quickly once the investigator had access to the 3 women who had previously requested transfers. All 3 agreed to speak. The youngest had kept her own record, a series of dated notes on her personal phone, each one brief, specific, and timestamped. Conrad Hale submitted his resignation 4 days before the review concluded. He did not receive a severance package. The company reached a confidential settlement with his assistant, the young woman from the second-floor library. She transferred to a different firm the following month and did not look back. On the evening of the 19th day after Yvette's termination, Otis Brannigan drove himself to Vine City. He did not take the Maybach. He drove the Lexus LS he kept in the estate's secondary garage, the car he reached for when he did not want to arrive somewhere as Otis Brannigan of Brannigan Meridian Energy, but simply as himself. He wore gray slacks and a dark pullover and no jacket. He had a slim envelope in his left hand when he stepped out of the car at 6:23 in the evening and stood in front of Yvette's building on Mim Street, looking at the porch the way a man looks at a door he is not sure will open for him. He knocked twice. She came to the door in house clothes. Dark sweatpants, a faded burgundy pullover. Her hair not arranged in the careful way it always was at the estate. She looked at him the way you look at something unexpected that requires a moment to place. He was 61 years old and stood on her porch without a title, without an assistant, without anything between himself and the consequence of having arrived here too late. He held the envelope at his side. He said, "I came to apologize, not to offer you anything. Just to apologize first." He said it the way he said things that had been thought about carefully, and then stripped of everything careful, plainly, without preamble, without the diplomatic softening that men in his position usually deployed before a difficult sentence. He had terminated people. He had negotiated settlements. He had delivered bad news in boardrooms for 4 decades. None of it had felt quite like standing on a porch in Vine City at 6:23 in the evening, holding a slim envelope and saying a sentence with nothing behind it except that it was true. Yvette looked at him for a long moment. The evening light was flat, and even the way it gets in Atlanta in late October, when the sun has dropped behind the tree line and the air holds the last of the warmth before giving it up for the night. She had spent 6 years working in his house and had exchanged perhaps 40 sentences with him in all that time. She knew what kind of man he was by the way he had kept his household and by the way the people in it spoke about him when he was not present. She knew what this cost him. She was not certain it was enough. She was also not certain it was not. She said, "You can come in. I just made coffee." He stayed for 41 minutes. The conversation was not recorded and was not repeated to anyone. What is known is that at no point during those 41 minutes did Otis Brannigan check his phone. His assistant sent 3 messages during that time. None of them were read until after he drove home. For a man who had responded to every message within 4 minutes for the past 11 years, this was, in its own way, a statement. After he left, Yvette sat at the kitchen table for a while. The 2 coffee cups were still there. She had not touched the slim envelope. He had set it on the table between them, and she had not reached for it and he had not pushed. It sat there now. She looked at it. Then she got up, rinsed both cups at the sink, set them on the drying rack, and went to check on her mother. She left the envelope on the table. She would look at it in the morning when she was rested, when she could look at it properly. Some things deserved the morning. She opened the envelope the next morning at 7:14 at the kitchen table with her coffee and her reading glasses and the particular quiet of a Tuesday before her mother was awake. The envelope contained a single folded sheet of paper. Not a contract, not a check. A typed description of a position, Director of Household and Estate Operations, Brannigan Properties Group, overseeing staff and operational management across 3 residential properties in the greater Atlanta area. The salary listed was $78,000 annually. At the bottom of the page, below the typed text, was a single handwritten line in ink she recognized from the notepad in the study. It said, "Because the house ran better when you were in it." She sat with it for a while. Then she called the number at the top of the page. Otis answered on the second ring. She told him she appreciated what he was trying to do. She told him she had not done what she did in that hallway in order to receive something in return, and that accepting the position would feel to her like it changed the nature of what she had done. She said all of this carefully, the way she said things she had thought about. There was a silence on the line. Then Otis said, "I know. That's exactly why I'm asking." She did not respond immediately. He said, "Think about it." He ended the call. Leonard arrived at her door 12 days later with a handwritten letter from Otis. Not a second offer, not an argument, just a letter. 2 paragraphs. The first described what the position would actually require: coordinating household staff across the Tuxedo Road estate, a property in Buckhead, and a lake house in North Georgia, managing schedules and vendor relationships, and the kind of operational detail that had been handled inconsistently for years because no one person had been responsible for all of it. The second paragraph was shorter. It said, "I am not asking you to forgive what happened on my property. I am asking you to consider whether the work itself is something you could do well and be paid correctly for doing." Those are 2 separate questions. She read it twice. She put it on the kitchen table next to the first sheet. She looked at both of them for several days. He came himself on the 23rd day, no envelope this time. He stood on the porch on Mim Street and said, "I have asked you twice through paper. I am asking you once more in person." He paused. "This is not charity. This is what competence looks like when it is finally paid correctly." He did not add anything to that. He did not need to. She had been waiting, without fully knowing it, for someone to name the things she had known about herself for 18 years. He had named it plainly, on a porch in Vine City without ceremony. She told him she would start the following Monday. 8 months later, Yvette Caldwell's mother enrolled in a comprehensive diabetes management program at Emory Midtown, one that included a dedicated care coordinator and quarterly nutritional counseling. The monthly cost was $312. Yvette paid it herself, from her own account, the way she had always paid for her father's care, as a matter of course, not as an act of sacrifice. The difference was that the account no longer sat below $200 the day before payday. That was the whole difference. It was not a small one. Diane Brannigan Hale was living in Savannah, completing the graduate program she had deferred 11 years earlier when she married Conrad. She and her father spoke twice a week. Otis flew down on the first Sunday of every month. They did not discuss Conrad. They were learning, slowly and without a roadmap, how to build something honest from what remained. On the morning of her official first day in the new position, Yvette arrived at Brannigan Estate at 8:03. She walked through the front entrance for the first time in 6 years and 4 months, the entrance the family used. She took the elevator to the second floor, where a corner room overlooking the East Garden had been set up as her office. A desk, 2 chairs, a window that faced the same sycamore she had raked leaves beneath every November for 6 years. She set her bag down. She sat. She looked out the window at the garden below, at the stone path she had walked 432 mornings, at the Japanese maple that had dropped its leaves early again this year. She poured coffee from the thermos she had brought from home. The time was 8:09. She was not wearing an apron. She was not wearing gloves. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. It had taken 44 years and 1 closed door and 11 seconds of standing still to arrive here. She drank her coffee. Otis came in at 8:47. He said something on her desk without comment and turned to go. She looked down. It was the notepad page, the one from the study. The short handwritten list, 8 or 9 names in a column, that she had seen under the brass paperweight on a Tuesday morning in September, the morning she had set it back down without reading it and moved on to the next room. She read it now, 8 names. Hers was first. Yvette Caldwell, written in the same steady ink as everything else on his desk. Nothing distinguished about it except its position at the top of the list. She looked at the corner of the page, where he had written the date in the small, precise numerals she recognized from 14 months of household logs and maintenance schedules. The date was 14 months before the Thursday in the library. 14 months before the closed door and the tray and the 11 seconds and the envelope sent certified mail for 4.85 cents. He had already known. She looked up. He was still in the doorway. She held the page. He met her eyes for 1 full second, The same direct, unhurried attention she had felt in the main hall on that September morning when he had stepped out of the study and nodded at her and gone back inside. Then he walked out. She set the page on her desk. She did not frame it. She did not put it away. She left it there, in the center of the desk, where she could see it when she worked. 20 minutes later, she heard the sound she had been hearing for 6 years and 4 months, the particular quick footsteps of two children who did not know how to move through a house slowly. The door opened. Two faces. The same faces that had been calling her Miss Yvette since the older one was 4 years old. She stood up. "Miss Yvette," the younger one said with the full confidence of a child who has never once questioned whether she would be there. "You're back." Yvette looked at them. She said, "I'm back." She came around the desk. She had not gone anywhere, and she had come a very long way. What stays with me about Yvette is not the moment she opened the door. That moment is important, but it is not the one I keep returning to. The moment I keep returning to is earlier. It is 11:23 at night, and she's sitting at a kitchen table in City with a yellow legal pad and a pen, writing down what she saw in plain factual language, and then sealing the envelope, and then setting it down, and then turning off the light. She did not send it that night. She went to bed. She lay in the dark for a long time. In the morning, she put on her shoes and her coat and walked 4 blocks to the post office and sent it for 4.85 cents. That is the moment. Not the heroism of it, the cost of it. The knowledge of what she was risking, held in her hands overnight, and the decision made again in the morning quietly, before anyone was watching. There is a kind of courage that announces itself and a kind that does not. The kind that does not is harder. It asks more. It receives less, at least at first. Yvette Caldwell was that kind of person long before Otis Brannigan put her name at the top of a list. She was that kind of person on every ordinary morning. She arrived at 6:51 and did her work well in a house where no one was watching. The list only confirmed what was already true. Before we go, we want to ask you something, and we mean it sincerely. Think about a moment in your own life. It does not have to be dramatic. It does not have to be a closed door in a hallway. When you saw something that was not right and you had to decide what to do about it. Maybe you acted. Maybe you did not, and you have carried that with you ever since. Maybe you are in that moment right now, standing at some version of that door, holding your own version of that tray, counting your own 11 seconds, and trying to decide. We want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell us about it. Or simply tell us where you are watching from and what time it is there. Or tell us about someone in your life who reminds you of Yvette. Someone who does the right thing when no one is watching, who shows up at 6:51 and folds their apron correctly, and does the work well even when the work is thankless. Those people exist in every community, in every family, in every house, on every street. They deserve to be named. Every comment reaches us, every single one. If you are watching this and you have not yet subscribed to this channel, please do that now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. We tell these stories because we believe that the people who do the quiet, costly, necessary things deserve to be seen, and because hearing about them makes the rest of us a little braver, a little more willing to open the door. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs it tonight. Like the video. Leave a word in the comments. These small things matter more than you know. Until next time, stay kind, stay blessed, and never underestimate the power of one quiet act of love.